118 at Mount Desert Island High School in Bar Harbor, believe it or not. So, welcome there. And these guys are just getting organized for a second. If we just take a minute, I think we'll be ready to go, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
You are breaking up just a little bit, but it might actually work better when I stop
Who's
talking.
breaking up? Who's breaking up?
You were
I am?
a little bit, but we'll try it out and let's see how this connection goes, okay?
My experience with Skype is that breaking up comes about because you're having too much signal going through. So sometimes you can solve the breaking up by taking the picture off of one of the participants. Just an idea. It leaves on your audio, but you know, it's just an idea. I don't know.
Okay.
Should I remove mine, Kieth?
You guys sound great right now.
Okay, as long as we're not breaking up.
Okay, and maybe what I'll do is if that happens, I can just give you a hand signal, we can do that, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take off my camera at that point. Is that what you're saying, Kieth?
Yeah.
Okay,
Exactly.
no problem. And with the introductions now, would you be doing them, or would you like, should I introduce myself? How would you like to do that?
Sure. Let's introduce ourselves first. How about our class says hello? Hi.
Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Awesome. Okay. And so, Keisha?
Everyone can hear me?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Hello, class. It's wonderful to be with you. I will be representing our humanity in the balance. Kieth, you probably mentioned OHIB to them.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. And I'll be observing and learning and enjoying from this exchange. My background, I've actually been in education and counseling for over a decade now. And I'm interested in transitioning into conflict resolution and peace work. So the topic of genocide is very close to me. I immigrated from Sri Lanka in my early teens. You might have, that must have been part of your curriculum, one of the conflict states. Am I correct, Kieth?
It was last year, but we did not have a
Last
student
year.
studying that this year. And
Okay, well, it's something to research.
yeah. Do you want to just briefly explain that?
Well, yeah, why don't I let the students research? There was a civil war between two ethnic groups, and there was systemic discrimination against the Tamils. I'm a Tamil, and so my family and I had to flee in my early teens, and we immigrated to Canada. There's a lot of history, so I will just leave it that perhaps the students would be interested in Googling and looking into the conflict. So this, because I was a war-affected youth, it has influenced my decisions and my path, my current path in pursuing conflict resolution and peace work.
Excellent.
Hmm.
And that puts you in touch with Terry as well, right?
Right. Yeah, I met Terry in 2012 and joined OHIB because of my interest in genocide, generally conflict resolution. So it's been a journey with OHIB, and I'm continuing to learn. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Glad for you to be here. Dr. Stanton?
Yeah, actually the students can read my bio on our website, which is genocidewatch.com. That's all I really need to say. Just let them read my bio.
Okay. It's long and involved.
You know, it's 35 years, so there's too much to talk about, I guess. Anyway, I started Genocide Watch in 1999 after serving in the State Department and writing the UN resolutions that created the Rwandan Tribunal, having also worked in Rwanda even before the genocide. And I really got started in this in my work in Cambodia in 1980 when I was the director for the relief program in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, right after the Khmer Rouge were overthrown. And what I saw there was really the first genocide I'd ever seen. And I was at the time taking a year off from Yale Law School to do that. And I came back with the determination to put the Khmer Rouge on trial for their crimes. And it took us over 30 years, but we have done it. And I wrote the rules for that tribunal, and, you know, I've really, it was my life work, I would say, those jury tribunals. And also the International Criminal Court worked on that, and was chair of the Washington Working Group on the International Criminal Court. And I mean, what I realized, though, after working in the State Department was that we could not count on governments to stop or prevent genocide, and we needed a worldwide mass movement to do that, to put pressure on governments. So that's really what we started in 1999, and I was amazed. There were no other anti-genocide organizations out there at the time. There were human rights organizations, and in fact I was very involved in Amnesty, but no organizations really focused on this problem that turned out to be the biggest killer in the 20th century, more than all the wars combined.
Wow.
So that's how I got going on.
So prior to working in the State Department, your work in Cambodia led you to this realization. Were there any other experiences in the 1980s that also fueled this?
Oh, sure. I was a civil rights worker in Mississippi in the 1960s. I'm a follower of Martin Luther King, and was trained, in fact, by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And so what I saw there, of course, was a pattern of mass discrimination against our black population in America. And, you know, I grew up in a household also of people who, my father was very active in the civil rights movement, was a charter member of CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. He actually led the second sit-in that was held in this country after James Farmer, who founded CORE. And my mother was also very involved. She was an English teacher, so I have a very special feeling about English teachers and teachers in general. I think teaching is a wonderful profession. And both of my parents were just determined to, you know, bring all of us up in a, I would say, human rights-centered kind of a family. I am a Christian. I have no a need to hide my light under a bushel, if you will, on that one. But I also am a very open Christian in the sense that I also accept, you know, the work of God and many other faiths. And so I'm a person who has grown up in that, and probably even you could say, it may even be in my blood, because one of my ancestors was Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who founded the women's suffrage movement in the United States, as you may know. She wrote the Seneca Falls Declaration demanding the right to vote for women. And it was the first time that had ever been done. And her husband, in fact, Henry Brewster Stanton, who was vice president of the World Anti-Slavery Movement, was so shocked by it, he thought it was too radical, that he actually walked out of the convention. He came around later. I mean, he was, you know, a little hard to persuade at first, but I think he finally realized it was right. So,
Wow.
So I got into it.
That's fantastic. And just to let you know, prior to this unit of study, we actually read Richard Wright's memoir, Black Boy, and our debate resolution was whether or not the United States continues to need affirmative action.
Oh, that's a great one. I know where I come down on that one. I'm very much in favor of affirmative action. I'm an anthropologist as well as a lawyer, and so I see these problems in a very long-term perspective, because I realize that the diversity of the world also includes a great deal of inequality and oppression by one group of another group. And when you have that kind of thing over time, it means that the oppressed group inherits the oppression of its ancestors. So you have a whole the African American population and other populations like Native Americans in the United States have been so historically oppressed that if we don't have something to right that wrong, even though it's many years that it's been going on, and many years we can't say we necessarily did it ourselves. Nevertheless, I think that our government and our institutions need to realize that the folks who've grown up as a result of that need to have special attention to the well, if you will, it's almost like a disability that is being handed to them by their ancestry. A lack of wealth, for example, is one of the biggest ones for both Native Americans and African Americans. I used to walk down the street when I was at the University of Chicago with Milton Friedman, who's a great believer in free enterprise. And I asked him, well, what do you think about affirmative action? And he said, well, I'm for it. He said, I think we should just give them money. Seriously. He didn't think you should have all these government programs to try to supervise how people spent their money. He said, look, we did it.
Yeah.
Time to make amends. So.
Yeah, if I can jump in and say, I agree with you, and there is actual scientific evidence now that trauma due to oppression and other causes is passed on generationally through the DNA.
Really?
Whether it's DNA or however, I'm an anthropologist, so, we believe everything's cultural, I guess you say. Although I really don't. I honestly don't believe that. I think some things are certainly DNA. My goodness sakes, the difference between men and women is certainly DNA. That's not cultural. We may culturalize it, but actually that's something we might want to discuss. I'm convinced, in fact, that women have a very different way of resolving conflict than men everywhere I've ever lived. It may be the way they're brought up, but it also may be, in our biology. I don't know. Maybe testosterone has something to do with it. I don't know. But I do know that women, as I like to say, when there's conflict, women talk and men fight. And it's not always that way. Men can talk too, and they should be taught to. But I've been struck with it, and I'm convinced that the fact that no genocide or war has ever been planned by women is not an accident. It may well be that part of it is, of course, that they've been kept out of positions of power in a lot of places, but not always. There have been some very powerful queens. And not one war that I know of, or genocide that I know of, has ever been planned by women. It's an interesting thing.
Fascinating. Maybe what would be helpful right now would be to talk a little bit about the work that you've done with Genocide Watch since 1999, and maybe picking out a couple of the most distinct examples you can think of. You mentioned influencing policy.
Sure, of course. One of the things I'm convinced of is that our current international institutions are failing to prevent or stop genocide. And part of it is that they are inherently flawed simply because of the way they're structured. The United Nations, for instance, has a Security Council in which 5 members, largely determined by the outcome of World War II, have a permanent veto. And that means that if Russia doesn't like something, or we don't like something, or China doesn't like something, it isn't going to happen at the UN. That is coming from the Security Council. So I've been really, as a lawyer, thinking, well, okay, so what do we do about that? How can we get around that? Because it's a real obstacle. In fact, the UN Security Council has never yet, that I know of, really prevented a genocide, with one possible exception. They sent 400 peacekeepers to Macedonia to try to keep Kosovo's civil war from spilling over into Macedonia, and that may well have worked. But there just aren't other examples I know of that are easy to find. The result is that I've been thinking about, okay, what do we do to try to find ways in the current system to prevent and take action before genocides happen. So, I looked at the UN Charter and I said, well, the General Assembly has powers that, in fact, were augmented during the Korean War with a resolution that was passed by the Security Council that said when the Security Council is paralyzed by the veto, the UN General Assembly can, by a 2/3 vote, authorize forceful action to prevent threats to international peace and security. It's called the Uniting for Peace Resolution. Now, it hasn't been used that often, 13 times actually. It wasn't just the Korean War. It's also used in Korea and in Suez and so forth. But I think we ought to reassert it. And so we've actually written a protocol, that's a sort of an amendment, if you will, to the Genocide Convention that would remind nations that that's still international law. And the other thing that is in the UN Charter that would allow us to take action is Chapter 8, which allows regional organizations like NATO or ASEAN or the African Union or ECOWAS, which is the Economic Community of West African States, which has been very effective actually in prevention, to take action even before or without authorization by the UN Security Council. So what we've done is we've written, and you can find these on our website, we call them the optional protocols. And so that's one possible way to address this institutional failure. The other thing that I noticed right away when we started working on East Timor was we started calling people at the UN and they would say, oh, well, you should call somebody else. It's not our department. The Indonesian troops and militias started killing people in East Timor after they voted for independence. And I said, if it's sort of like Ghostbusters, who do you call? Ghostbusters? You call the UN, who are you going to get? Well, we realized that the UN, there wasn't any single place you could call if there was a genocide that was about to happen. And so I wrote a paper in 2000 after the East Timor crisis had been dealt with, and that we were very involved in that. I'll talk a little more about that. But I wrote a paper advocating the creation of a Office of the Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General on the Prevention of Genocide. And then our Alliance Against Genocide, which was the coalition that we founded at the same time we founded Genocide Watch, lobbied at the top levels of the UN with the Office of Kofi Annan, who at the time was Secretary General, and we succeeded in getting him to, in fact, create that office. And the office is still going and has been getting more and more effective. I've known all the guys who've served in the position of special advisor. I'd like a woman to do it next, but anyway, we also created there's a position called the Special Advisor on the Responsibility to Protect, and a woman now is that advisor, and they're in the same office. So that was a way we thought of facilitating training, at least, education in how to prevent genocide, and mainly aiming at training of national leaders. I would like it to be accompanied with a much more robust early warning capability. When you see it coming, years in advance to be able to say, you know, we're really worried about this this dehumanization that's going on, say against the Rohingya in Myanmar and Burma. They're, you know, being called all kinds of names, just the way the Nazis called Jews, and they called them vermin, and the genocidists in Rwanda called the Tutsis cockroaches. I mean, that kind of dehumanization is going on there. So let's basically raise hell about it. That kind of early warning, of course, is what Genocide Watch specializes in. So if you take a look at our website, which we started back in about, I think, 2001 or something, and we've had 50 million hits on that website. We've had 3 different versions of it, but if you go back to genocidewatch.org, that was the original version. It's now got a much fancier look. I mean, genocidewatch.com was put together by our interns. But anyway, and by the way, keep that in mind. Our interns are all students. They do get academic credit for their work. They're undergraduate students for the most part. I've had a couple of high school students who've interned with us. They've been among the best, in fact. And you know why? Because high school students almost seem to live and breathe the modern technology. I mean, you guys are so good at working with computers and figuring out stuff that I would never have a chance of figuring out. I mean, man, I feel like I'm in the 19th century sometimes. But you, my gosh, I had one high school student, she came to work for us, and within 2 days she had created apps for Genocide Watch, you know, for both iPhones and Androids. It's amazing to me. So I strongly recommend you think about that. You don't have to wait till you get out of school to start changing the world. And what our plan is in the long run here with Genocide Watch is to get more and more organizations into the Alliance Against Genocide, which now has, well, I just recruited about another 3 or 4 in Iraq. I just got back from Iraq last night. We've been investigating ISIS because my next court, if you will, is going to be to help the Iraqi government try the 600 or so people they've captured from ISIS, from the Islamic State group. Anyway, we are adding more and more organizations every single month to this coalition. The idea here is, instead of Genocide Watch having to do all the work, you know, trying to create some kind of an empire, our job is to really just be a catalyst for a lot of other organizations to form around the world. And we have been quite successful in having that happen. And we communicate with each other. We don't try to tell each other what to do, how to raise money, or anything like that. But we do work on common goals. And so one of them, as I say, was this creation of that Office for the Prevention of Genocide at the UN. In addition to that, we work strongly behind the scenes with government people. I know so many people in the State Department and the National Security Council and so forth, and we communicate with them regularly. We formed a genocide working group, for instance, here in Washington last year to get staff people from congressmen's offices, from Senate offices, from NGOs, that is, you know, from non-governmental organizations working on genocide, and church leaders and other people together to get a declaration out of Congress that ISIS is committing genocide against Yazidis, that's a small minority religion in Iraq, Christians, the Shabak Shia minority. Shia is one kind of Islam, and Shabaks are a particular ethnic type of that, and other minority groups. Some that you've probably never heard of, the Mondayans that think that John the Baptist was really kind of the Messiah, for instance. Anyway, ISIS thinks all these groups, are evil, that they ought to be killed. And so they've literally either driven all the Christians out of their towns. That was just luck on the part of the Christians. They knew that it was coming because they saw the Yazidis slaughtered on August 3rd, 2014, and the ISIS people were headed for the Christian towns, and so the Christians got out of there, and they abandoned their towns and largely went to Kurdistan, where they were protected and are still there in the cities and in displaced persons camps. So we interviewed a lot of people in those displaced persons camps. I've walked through all those towns now that they've been liberated from ISIS, and they're still abandoned. ISIS tried to destroy as many churches and houses and businesses and everything else as they could. I don't know, this kind of work, let me tell you, I think I'm going to retire someday, but I don't know when it's going to be. I'm 70 now, and I'm trying to pass this on, and I think I've succeeded now because I found somebody who's really, really good, and I was out there with her in Iraq this last couple weeks.
Let me ask, is part of your job or part of your vision when you're going to a place to like Iraq to document what ISIS is doing, is part of your mission to report, to be a witness,
yes,
to bear witness for the world?
It is. We write reports. We also write a lot of things that are aimed at providing the facts to key government people and UN people in a lot of governments, not just our own, in the United Kingdom, for instance, and France and Germany and elsewhere. And we provide these, really, we call them country reports. They're very short. I have a basic rule. Unless it's less than 2 pages, it won't get read. I know that from having worked in the State Department. And so they're very short. But we rely on longer reports from some of our member organizations in the Alliance, including groups like the International Crisis Group, which writes absolutely superb reports. And we also have other groups like Fortify Rights. They're particularly concerned about the Rohingya. We have groups all over, really. And in Iraq, we have a couple in particular called Shlomo is one group of Christian lawyers, and then we have Hammurabi, which is an all-Iraq human rights group, and then there's a group called Emma, which is a women's rights group in Iraq, made up of all kinds of groups of people, of women. Those groups, are the ones, they're where we get our information from there. Anyway, what I'd like to do now, I've talked a little bit about this. I'd kind of like to take some questions and comments from some of the students. Would you mind? Will we do that?
No, I would love that.
I don't like to lecture, real honest to goodness. I really don't. So I'd rather talk with you guys. Why don't you ask the questions, make comments, please.
Great. We rely on volunteers, so Seth is stepping up. And let us know if you can hear the questions, okay?
Yeah, please speak up.
Where has your involvement with the organization taken you, like around the world?
Oh my goodness. Well, my wife and I have a map, and we put little pins where we've been. It's ridiculous, actually. She's in charge of all of our programs for the U.S. government to keep women alive in childbirth around the world. She works for the U.S. Agency for International Development. She's a nurse midwife, but she's also just a master planner. She's really, really amazing. I'm just a little biased, maybe, but anyway, I think last time I counted, she had gone to over 150 countries. I think there's only 194 members of the United Nations, and I think I'm up there around 130 something. You know, it's more that you work, especially though you focus. You don't just go to countries. I mean, actually, most of that travel was done before I even founded Genocide Watch. Something you should consider, by the way. Sometimes I think people have their lives backwards. They should retire first and then go to work. And by the way, that's actually possible. You don't need a lot of money to travel. You just need a lot of time. But
And
yeah.
physical agility.
But yeah, and then when you're healthy, you see, when you're young, you can do that. It's it's a good time to do it. I joined the Peace Corps, and that's where I got started, really. I went to the Ivory Coast in West Africa, and I went all over Africa during those couple of years. And since then, I've been back. I've lived in Rwanda, in Swaziland, and right now, for instance, I'm really focused on problems in South Africa, because I think it's not a place where there's going to necessarily be genocide, but it's a problem where they have an ongoing problem with racism, not just white racism, but also black racism against whites. And right now I'm about to, for instance, go there to testify in a case in which a labor union leader was basically using the kind of language that Hitler used against Jews in the Third Reich. And it is directed against Jews in South Africa. And so they brought a case in front of their equality court for hate speech. They actually outlaw hate speech there. It's aimed at harming another group. And not just kind of in general harming, but literally, where there's real possibility of physical harm. So I'll be testifying on behalf of the Jewish community in South Africa on that one. I've been to South Africa many times. Archbishop Tutu, in fact, blessed our group once when I went there and laid hands on us. I was there with Martin Luther King III and a group of young leaders that included Justin Trudeau. And, it's kind of amazing to me sometimes where this has taken me. I almost wonder, why did this happen sometimes? And I mean, for instance, in the middle of my time as a law professor at Washington Lee, I was asked to go and give legal advice to the Ukrainian independence movement. And I got there, 1988. This is when it was still the Soviet Union. And the KGB had arrested a bunch of their leaders. And they said, okay, Professor Stan, what should we do? And I said, well, first of all, Dr. King taught us you always have to personalize injustice. So we're going to march down there to the prison where they're holding these people and demand to see them. And they won't let us see them, I promise you. But then we're going to go back to the middle of Kieth, and we're going to have a big rally, and they're going to say it's illegal and everything else, and we're going to basically dare them to arrest us. And we're going to have 5,000 people there, and they're not going to be able to arrest all of them. Not even close. And we're going to start training people in nonviolent resistance. And we're going to take it straight out of the civil rights movement in America. And we did it. And we started going down to that prison every week. And, we had it organized. It was straight out of I don't know, you should see this. You got to see it. The Birmingham, Alabama children on Easter Sunday in 1964 marched with the leadership of Martin Luther King. They had run out of adults because Birmingham had arrested nearly all of their protesters. They decided to let the children march, for which King was criticized. They got into the middle of the street, and Bull Connor, who was the chief of police, ordered his police to sick the dogs on those children and release fire hoses on them. And it was Easter Sunday. And his police refused to do it. I think it was one of the turning points in American history. We saw that very same dynamic in Ukraine. We knew that if we treated those KGB people as people and those police as people, they would finally come around and support us. And they did. And by golly, Ukraine became independent. So, what we've got here is a force. We've got a spiritual force working for us. So that's, what can I say?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
When you say that you want to humanize the police, is that because dehumanization goes both ways?
It sure does. One of the things about genocide, and you've probably read the 10 stages, is dehumanization is an essential part of it, essential stage. In fact, it's really, I'd say it's the key that makes genocide possible. When you start treating the other side as less than human, then it becomes possible to do all kinds of terrible things to them, to commit atrocities against them. If you can humanize, people will appeal to their moral sensibility as human beings. Dehumanization is designed to essentially disempower the moral consciousness of the people that it affects. It's an attempt to take whole groups of people and put them outside what we call the universe of moral responsibility. So if you say, oh, these people aren't really fully human, then so what? So then it doesn't matter that much if you kill them. You're going to purify the society, get rid of them. Well, if you can convince people they really are human, it makes a big difference. And that is what we did in Ukraine, it's what we did in the civil rights movement. It's why I believe so strongly in that method. I think nonviolent resistance is not only morally right, I think it's also tactically right. It doesn't mean it all, that you only can use nonviolence against genocide. I don't agree with that. I'm not a pacifist in that sense. I believe if you have groups that are cutting off heads or putting people into gas chambers, you got to stop them with force. But that's a very different thing. It's a last resort than when you're trying to change a government or change an entire system. And that's where I think nonviolent resistance is the best. Anyway, I'm sorry, I talked too much. You guys ask me another thing. Yeah, please.
Paige has a question.
Yep.
I guess it's kind of like a clarifying question, but what I'm wondering is, where's the line when you call something a genocide? Is it when the stages start to appear, or is it when all of them have been completed?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Legally, it's when you get to the extermination stage. In other words, that's what the lawyers all say. And the reason we're not satisfied with that at Genocide Watch is if you have to wait that long to call it genocide, it's too late. In other words, the mass murder will have already started. And by that time, essentially, you got to send in the Marines. And you're usually not going to get the Marines. You're usually not going to be able to do it because very few countries are going to be willing to risk their own soldiers to try to stop mass killing in some other country. You got to prevent it long before that. And that's why this model of the process developing into genocide is so important in preventing it. It's why Genocide Watch has always been 2 or 3 years ahead of any other organization in predicting genocide. And so we have no qualms about using the word genocide before it happens. In other words, saying, this is a warning. That's why we call ourselves Genocide Watch. Watch out for genocide here. It could happen. We're not saying this is genocide already. We do know, however, that when you have a genocide, as we have 4 of them going on simultaneously in Sudan, for instance, right now, don't ever hesitate to use the word.
Another question,
Okay.
Zach.
So this kind of goes along with what Paige said, and what you said. Okay, so you said that even though it's not technically a genocide by legal definition until the extermination starts happening, it's still illegal to conspire to commit it or to plan it, right?
Right, that's correct.
Okay.
That's absolutely right. In fact, it's a very good question, because it means if you can catch people who are really planning it, conspiring to do it, they have committed a crime already.
Seems hard to get
Under the Genocide Convention. They can be prosecuted for that. And more importantly, this is the one where you can really find out who it is. You can have people who are inciting it. That means who are making public statements saying all these Tutsis should be killed and sent back to Ethiopia where they came from, down the Akagera River. In other words, dead. That was a speech that was made by a man named Leon Mugesera in 1992 in Rwanda. He was inciting people to commit genocide. He should have been prosecuted then and there. So you're right. If you have that kind of hate speech, it should be prosecuted.
And so is it the lack of awareness around the world that prevents those kinds of incitements from being prosecuted?
I think so. It's also lack of political will to stop them. Now, there's some laws, some countries that have firm laws on this. South Africa is one. Others is Germany, for instance. You try to put a swastika on the side of a wall in South Africa, you're going to get arrested and thrown into jail. Now, some people say, oh my goodness, that's a violation of free speech, isn't it? Well, the answer is no, it isn't. Because incitement to commit a crime has never been protected speech in any country I know of. If you have some guy who's going out and saying to, oh my God, we need to get rid of all of these Polish people who are down the block here. And so let's get armed. Let's go down there and kill them. If you have somebody saying that kind of stuff, he ought to be arrested. That's not free speech. And so, I worry about that in any country, but this is a country where we have such a high value on free speech. And the internet is one of the examples of that. But we even allow neo-Nazi websites on our internet. And they inspire some of these guys like Dylan Roof and some of the others to go and kill people. I don't personally think we should allow those. Now that's where I'm a little bit unusual, I guess, as a lawyer. Most lawyers are real, total First Amendment free speech people. And I do believe in the First Amendment. But I think websites that literally incite people to commit crimes ought to be taken off the internet.
And about the First Amendment, isn't stuff like hate speech and direct threats towards other groups, isn't that not protected by the First Amendment?
It's not. It's not protected. You know what the difference is, though? In our country, our balancing act was it's a really hard balance, isn't it? But our balancing act was defined by Oliver Wendell Holmes in a famous case that he judged, in which he said that it is not protected speech to shout fire in a crowded theater. And his basic rule was what he called a clear and present danger test. If there was a clear and present danger that the speech would, in fact, essentially recruit people to do things that are dangerous or violent, then that could be prosecuted. In other words, it's different than if somebody just says, oh, boy, we hate all these people from that country or something like that. That's probably not prosecutable. It's just a statement of some guy's craziness. And in our system, it's supposed to be able to be countered by opposing speech. That's the idea, at least. I'm, as I say, a little bit not in the mainstream on that one. I think that we should consider the fact that if you have repeated hate speech, it can create a culture that is conducive to genocide. That's what the Nazis tried to do, their propaganda. It's what, massive campaigns of hate speech, like Slobodan Milosevic's hate speech against Bosnian Muslims did. And I don't think that's protected.
It's just tough.
We have a question
Okay.
here from Ryan.
Yes.
So, what can we do different to prevent genocide, and can education alone prevent genocide?
That's such a good question. It's really at the heart of it, isn't it? Well, in fact, you've got it, I think, there. I have concluded after many years of working on this that it is education that is the key. It's reaching people of your age, in fact. If we can reach every student in the world and teach them how genocide develops and how to prevent it, I think we'll make a huge contribution to the world. And so right now I'm working on a book, in fact, that's designed for high school students. And it's just going to be called The 10 Stages of Genocide. I'm not claiming this is going to revolutionize the universe or anything like that, but I do think it would be a tool that teachers, like Mr. Eaton and others, could use in their classes, to teach how genocide develops and to use specific examples from previous genocides to sort of fill out the picture, to help students understand how it has developed in the past. It's going to be short, 150 pages or something like this. And I hope to, put it on as an ebook on Amazon or give it away free or whatever, put it on our website. I've already got commitments from the Rwandan government to translate it into Kinyarwanda and from the Documentation Center for Cambodia, which is one of our best members, to translate it into Khmer in Cambodia. So I hope that it will spread. So education, I'm convinced, is a real big factor. I'd also like to see groups like STAND, for instance, which is the student movement against genocide, organized in as many high schools and colleges as possible. And in fact, Genocide Watch is going to be working with STAND this year to essentially give the different chapters that form assignments to help us keep tabs on certain countries. It can be decided by each chapter. Well, okay, we'd like to keep an eye on Bangladesh, or we'd like to keep an eye on Burma. We'd like to watch Sudan, and you guys can really help us. I've learned from experience how great you are at research, especially using the internet.
Another question. I think that we have a question from Adam.
Do you think that technology and can help to prevent genocide as well, and raise awareness about technology?
Absolutely.
In combination with
Absolutely. Let me give you some specific examples. Right now, we are getting a lot of video taken with simple cell phones that are inside Myanmar, in the hands of Rohingya. Of course, the Burmese government is trying to confiscate them all because they don't want this stuff to get out. But just any old cell phone can take pictures of what the Burmese police and military are doing to Rohingya. And then those images can be gotten up, put on the web, on YouTube and everywhere else. I mean, it is a fantastic force. It is huge. It's changing everything. And the other thing that is happening, of course, is we now have new ways of gathering evidence that allow the evidence to be essentially taken by almost anyone, and in a way that it can be actually used in a court when you do catch people and can put them on trial. There's a new program that was put out by the International Bar Association, for instance, called Eyewitness. You can look it up online. And you put that thing on your cell phone. They have an Android version and, an iPhone version. It allows you to take encrypted images on your iPhone, videos, pictures, etc., and upload them straight into the internet, and they go straight to a server in London. And they are date stamped, they're GPSed. In other words, they know exactly where and when they were taken, and also by going straight to this place in London, put on a server, it can be proven that they haven't been tampered with, haven't been edited or anything like that. That is what a lawyer would call chain of custody. And I can tell you, as a lawyer, it's crucial for making a case against somebody. You got to show that the evidence wasn't tampered with, and that this is real evidence. Can you imagine? I mean, I thought about what we could have done with that in Cambodia back in 1980. We didn't have it. So we largely couldn't use a lot of the evidence that I gathered in the 1980s for our trial of the Khmer Rouge, because, the chain of custody wasn't good enough. They still are being convicted, of course, because their crimes were so enormous. But it's more important, of course, not to convict somebody after the genocide. It's more important to try to stop it when it's happening or even prevent it. And so if you can get evidence out that people are being tortured in Turkey or in, somewhere else, and you can really get names even of the people who are doing it, what an enormous, fabulous kind of a tool that is. There's also ways to use IT to counter false rumors. We found out that in Kenya, for instance, some people who were trying to stir up ethnic hatred between the Kikuyu and the Luo and other groups in an election campaign were putting out false rumors. All these Kikuyu had been killed in such and such a place, which was to get the Kikuyu to rise up and try to kill Luo, say. Well, we were able to track down these rumors, and you get almost instant answers to say, no, that's not true. People were here. They were right there at the place these people say it happened, and it didn't happen. That kind of thing really helped to prevent violence in the most recent election in Kenya. So, yes, I also think, and I'm going to start working with Google on this, the capabilities of communication now are so enormous. Google Translate, have you used Google Translate? Has just become an artificial intelligence tool. They went from using old models of language to basically using the extraordinary power of supercomputers to be able to almost instantly translate everything into, I think they're up to 170 languages or something. Well, that's revolutionary. The world was divided up in all these ethnic groups and couldn't talk to each other, couldn't understand each other. Google Translate is going to end that. Not completely, of course, because we're still ethnic by nature. We're born into a certain ethnic group, and we're raised with a certain language. In fact, if people ask me, well, what's the sort of root cause of genocide, I have to say it's ethnocentrism. It's when we think our ethnic group is somehow better than anybody else's, and the other group really doesn't have a right to exist. But overcoming that by really being able to understand the other ethnic groups is going to be hugely helped by these capabilities of communication. So, enough. Let me go on.
We have more questions, and Eliza first. She hasn't asked one yet.
Do you see conflict happening in a country right now that you think could lead to a large-scale genocide?
Oh, yes. In fact, I would urge you to look at our website. We have a map, in fact, of the whole world, and we have the countries, sort of classified by what stage we think they've gotten to. Now, understand when I talk about stages, I don't mean, first you have to have number 1, and then number 2, and then number 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and so forth like that. It's not a linear model that I'm proposing here. It's more of a logical one, where you say, okay, before you have stage 2, you've got to have stage 1. Before you have symbolization, you've got to have classification. If you don't have any division in the society, no classifications in the society, then you won't have any symbolization, because there won't be any need for names for these different groups, for instance. So there's a logic to the process, but the truth is that in any genocide, you're going to have all of these stages working simultaneously. So what we have done, though, is it's more like taking a temperature. If you see that a certain society has gotten up to, let's say, the polarization stage, which is where I think the U.S. is right now, where South Africa is, it means that certain measures need to be taken. You need to use measures to depolarize the society at that level. And there are known ways to do that. And so that's why, we use that kind of a model. Now, you asked me a specific question about, okay, where do you think there are real dangers right now? And, the places I really think actually you could almost say there's genocide already in Myanmar, but I think it would get much worse. You can see that if you look on the map, the ones that are the countries that are in red, we believe there is ongoing genocide already. But in some of them, it's much worse than in others. In Sudan, it's terrible. Ethiopia, there is ongoing genocide, but it is a much smaller kind of a problem. So I would say Ethiopia is one of those countries where you have a small ethnic group, the Tigray, who essentially run the whole country, even though they're only 6% of the population. But you can imagine what the rest of the groups think about that. So the Amhara and the Oromo, who make up almost 40% of the population, are constantly being oppressed by that group. Well, they're going to rise up. And when they rise up, then the Tigrayan army is going to say, oh, no, you don't. We're keeping power here. And so they will then start killing people. And one of the things that we've learned from this is power itself not only corrupts, but corruption brings about a desire for permanent power. In other words, once you have power, it allows you to also get rich. And so in a lot of these countries, you have an elite who make a fortune from their power. They control everything in the country, all the mining and, telecommunications and cell phone systems and everything else. They then, put all their money in Swiss bank accounts. Well, do you think they're going to give up power easily? Just look what's happening right now, for instance, in Gambia. In Gambia, the president, who had been in there and declared he was going to be president for life, was defeated in an election. But he refuses to step down. He refuses to leave office. His opponent, who won the election, is being sworn in today as president of Gambia, but in a different country, in Dakar, Senegal, the country which is right next door to Gambia. Because the current president of Gambia says, no, I have power, I am keeping power. Situations like that are ones in which you're going to eventually have genocide. And so, that's a country I'm really worried about. I would say, let me think about some others that really are on the list.
Before you get to those, could we take a couple more questions? Because we only really have like 5 or so more minutes.
Okay, sure. Look at the map. And by the way, if you blow up the map a bit and you click on the name of the country, it will give you a video about the situation in that country. Only my interns could have figured out how to do that. For me, it's magic. But anyway, yes, another question or two. Yeah.
Okay, Paige and then Seth.
Okay. Do you think people misuse the word genocide in situations where it could just be civil war or politicide? Do you think that's happened or is happening now?
Oh, yes, of course. Everybody wants to say that their atrocity is genocide because it's a powerful word. In fact, it was meant to be a powerful word. That's why Raphael Lemkin invented the word. You know, it means the murder of a people. And it's sort of the ultimate crime. Politicide, by the way, I don't think should be distinguished from genocide. It was originally part of the definition of genocide for Raphael Lemkin. It was taken out of the Genocide Convention by the Soviet Union because they knew if they included it, they'd be guilty. So I don't make that distinction. I mean, some people say, oh, well, it's politicide, it's not really genocide. I say, you know what? I don't think the victims of mass murder really care what you call it. I think if it's mass murder, it's just plain mass murder. So we are happy calling that genocide if people want to use it. I think the same, by the way, for crimes against economic groups, which the communists were so good at. The Soviet Union killed about 60 million people. Red China, about the same number. And they did it on the basis of class. They said, oh, these are enemies of the people because they belong to the wrong class. They killed more people by far than Hitler and the Nazis. So yes, I think you can misuse the term legally, perhaps, but my view on that is let's not get into legal academic debates about what is and what isn't genocide. Let's concentrate on the victims. Let's find out who it is who is being killed. What are the terrible human rights violations or atrocities? As one of my colleagues, David Sheffer, in the State Department, said, let's stop this debating. Let's just call them atrocity crimes. You know, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. They're all atrocity crimes, as he said. Let's not waste our time on these debates. Well, I thought maybe he might be right until I actually did a survey of the effects of using the G word, the genocide word. And what we did is we applied it to 4 recent genocides, Bosnia, Kosovo, Rwanda, and Darfur. And what we learned was, as long as the word ethnic cleansing was used to describe those situations, no forceful action would be taken to stop them. Soon as the word genocide would be used, there would be forceful action within a month. So it is still a very powerful word. I think actually there are more genocides than a lot of people are aware of. Okay, one more.
So this is a pretty kind of big question, but like, what is the most important thing we can do to stop genocide?
What is the most important what?
What is the most important thing we can do to stop genocide, in your opinion?
I think it's creating tolerant societies in which education has convinced people that they must not only live with each other, but enjoy the diversity that they live with. I think that's the most important thing. It's why I'm so happy living in the United States. Even though we still are struggling with racism and all kinds of, you know, the history that we have come through. I mean, God knows this country came through multiple genocides against Native Americans. We had slavery in this country. You look at the history of this country, it's really pretty terrible. But I'm also incredibly happy that we have the diversity that we've got in this country and continue to be proud of it, despite some people. That's the kind of society I want to live in. And, you know, I think the more societies in the world that are like that, the less genocide we will have.
Wow, that's great. What a great question. Thank you so much. appreciate it. And we send our best and hope that you're warm there in Washington, D.C.
We're warmer here than you are, I bet you.
Yeah, that's true.
I grew up in Wisconsin, so believe me, I know. I mean, really.
Oh, well, we really do appreciate this very much, and we will be in touch, and I'm honored and really do thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay? And we'll be in touch, okay?
Yes, indeed. Thanks.
All right. Appreciate
You
it.
all go out and change the world now, okay?
Okay. Bye.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Chen.
Bye-bye.